At the University of Lincoln, we recognise that change is coming, and we're preparing our students to lead that change. That means a great student experience underpinned by world-class research. With our students, we're solving global challenges in fields like health, energy, agriculture and climate. So come to an open day and be the change.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our very special live lounge today. I'm so pleased and privileged to be able to introduce our visiting Professor Chris Packham, who's been with us this morning and going around campus looking at all our exciting campus wildlife. But now we're going to talk about preparing to save the planet and preparing for a life less ordinary. And I think we've got so much to contribute there. And I know Chris is ready to give you lots of exciting inspiration. And please do add your comments and questions while we're talking. We'd be delighted to hear from you and to know what you're interested in too. But over to Chris.
Yeah, well, the first thing, thank you, Libby, I'd like to say is welcome. I'm very pleased to be back in person at the University of Lincoln. It's a great campus, great work being done here, catching up with some of the research a bit later on, which is particularly pertinent to my own field of interest. So it's great to be back in that capacity. We've all exercised the ability to do things remotely, as we are now, and we've learned how to maximise our efficiency and effectiveness when it comes to doing that. But there's nothing like getting down on your hands and knees in a rough old meadow, as we did this morning, looking at the prints of hedgehogs or picking up some of those invertebrates. And we've had a large number of young people, prospective students, perhaps some of them, this morning engaging with that wildlife. And I'm looking out the window here and I can almost see the spires of the very fabulous Lincoln Cathedral. So we're not far from the city centre, but we've enjoyed a riot of wildlife. But the fact is that we know that for all the sunshine outside and for all of those bugs and hedgehogs and the joy that we can very often find in our gardens or just beyond, that our world is facing serious problems. You only need to turn on the news to see that parts of Canada and North America have been ablaze. Cyprus in Europe has had very serious wildfires this year. And we ourselves have had very unusual weather, I keep to stress weather, in the sense that we had, the coldest and frostiest April on record. And we're about to break records, I think, for the wettest August as well. So climate is beginning to exact an impact on our weather, and our weather impacts us on a daily basis. And whilst it might make you and I a bit damp, you've got to think what it's doing out there in the world that how it supports us, particularly, say, in our farm landscape. So a lot of people are understandably frightened of the potential impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss. And I think a little fear is actually quite useful. I think we need to be frightened at this point. It's a good motivator, fear, and in its primal sense, it promotes fight or flight. And I'm hoping that it's going to promote a fight, because we need to get fighting these issues. And we're well armed if we're going to continue that sort of combative analogy, in that we have a plethora of technological and simple practical means of addressing the problems which face us. So it's not that we're not empowered to make a difference. The reason that we're in this catastrophic mess is that we haven't been addressing that forthrightly enough, urgently enough, or broadly enough. And so things have continued to get worse when they could have been getting better. Perhaps that's typical of the human species. We are very, very good at cure, not quite so good at prevention, even when we have the tools to implement that prevention. But one thing is clear, now is the time that we've got to take more rapid action. And one of the reasons why I'm very pleased to be a visiting professor here at Lincoln is to use whatever means I can to actively encourage a new generation of young scientists, particularly those in the natural sciences. I think we're going to need, actually, and that's a key word, need, new generations of educationally empowered young people to get out on the ground and make the difference for our planet. I'm 60 years old. I do everything I can on a daily basis. I'm quite diligent and work as hard as I can, but I am also sensible enough to recognise that being 60 is different than being 16 or 26. And I'm very keen to empower young people, to give them the opportunities to use their energy, their time, their considerable abilities, and their attitude as well. I like young people's attitude. I like the fact that they take risks and they make mistakes, because if you make a mistake, you've got any sense, you don't do it again, but you try harder next time. And so I think that delegating more responsibility to younger generations at this point would be really advantageous when it comes to addressing some of our issues. But Libby, I think the first thing we need to say, and I've used the word already, is that we mustn't be in a position at this point where we think that they, whoever they are going to solve all of our problems for us. I think that we have to recognise that I and you and we collectively are an essential part of the solution. And in order for us to be part of that solution, we need to do something critical as individuals. And that is that we need to realise that we can make a difference. That's as individuals. I need to know that I can do something which makes a difference. And if you know that, and therefore we know that, then we begin to grow as a force for realistic change. And so that recognition, that self-empowerment is critically important. And I think that sometimes people underestimate their ability. We've been out on the campus today, and when I first came to the campus quite a few years ago now, it was all very neat and all lawns. But because of your action, Libby, and that of your team and others, it's now ablaze with wildflowers. We've been looking at hedgehog prints this morning. There have been fundamental and very positive changes taking place here because you, in this instance, have got together with a community of others and made a difference. And I think the key thing is to recognise that and to say, top work, well done, what's next? So for me, that's the fundamental thing. I don't think we're doing too much progress if everyone thinks, I'm just a drop in the ocean. But as I said on a rather cheesy way the other day on the radio, if you think you're just a drop in the ocean, you've also got to consider what is an ocean but a multitude of drops, as they said in Cloud Atlas. And it does sound a bit cheesy, but it does actually point to the truth that we have collectively enormous power for change, because there's a lot of us, and if we all put our minds to it and do the right thing, then we could make a very, very dramatic and almost instantaneous difference to so many of the issues which currently blight our lives.
I think that's so right, Chris. It is all about empowering people, us, and other people to make changes. And thank you for the kind comments about the campus. I have fabulous colleagues who've done loads and loads of work. That's something about being at Lincoln. We're a community, one community, and we've worked very hard on making our campus more environmentally friendly. But I agree, it's about empowerment. Now, how knowledge is empowering. We need people to understand their role in the world, and we need to know that they've got the right facts at their fingertips, don't we? That's part of what we need to encourage people to do, to read, to learn, and to educate themselves. I think that's so critical.
It is, and again, for me, a university education, as my parents would have called it, has proved really beneficial, not just for my particular interest within natural history, zoology, so on and so forth, but also because it teaches you how to acquire knowledge and how to use that knowledge. And the difference between knowledge and information, I think, is pertinent too. I mean, I've got a mobile phone, thankfully, out of reach at the moment. If you ask me something that I don't know the answer to, so long as I've got a signal, I can find that answer instantaneously. In very simplistic terms. That's not knowledge, that's information. Knowledge is something which allows you to build context, because you can join up different pieces of information to build a bigger whole. And that's useful, because the type of knowledge that we need to address our planetary problems is probably too complex for most of us to deal with everything. But we don't have to if we are in a community, because we basically, part of being a productive, empowered community is delegation. And so we can delegate to members of our community to do their bit of it whilst we do others. So, for instance, in my job is principally as a communicator, as a bridge. And one of the reasons I enjoy coming to the University of Lincoln is I meet scientists here who are doing work because that's their skill. That's not a skill that I have, it's a skill that I admire. And I can hopefully, on occasions, bring the things that they discover to a wider audience. So I form a bridge between the scientists and essentially the consumers who want the knowledge that they've acquired. So my role is a communicator. I don't have the capacity, the skill, the time, or to do the research that they do, but I'm a part of a cog in that machine of disseminating that information. So again, I think that points to the need for us to work together in a community sense when it comes to making effective change, and understanding that we don't all have to do everything, but we've got a team effectively that can fit together, and we can get things done far more efficiently. I think we need to get on with it. I think a sense of urgency is what's required. I think, when we look at the world today, it's easy to feel disempowered when we think about our political situation. And I'm talking globally here. I'm not having a swipe at UK politicians. I'm looking at a global set of governance and governors. And these are exceptional times. And I think it's fair to say that many of those governors are not exceptional in their skills, and this is a bit of a handicap for progress. But there's no point in moaning about that. We have the option to elect different people in the democratic parts of the world, and that choice is cyclical and will come round wherever we are again. And I think with increasing determination, we will choose to elect people who show a greater degree of diligence, expertise, and energy when it comes to addressing environmental issues. But ultimately, it's up to us to ask our elected representatives to represent us, and therefore we have the capacity to communicate to them our desires, and that's what we need to do in a peaceful, democratic way, and to do as citizens. So I do think, again, that having a community of concerned people, maybe it's a neighbourhood group who are going to communicate with their local council. I mean, that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. If you come together and you can represent a consensus view and you can rationalise and reason with those decision makers, then essentially their duty is to implement what you wish. And increasingly people wish for a healthier, happier and more sustainable world. So again, that's a power thing. And I think I'd like to use the word power in a clean sense and not as a dirty word, because often I think people fear power in that sense, and we have good reason to, perhaps historically. But at this point in time, we do need to seize the power for change ourselves, and I think exercise it, as I said, in a peaceful, democratic way, but rapidly and further.
I think we also have the opportunity to do things differently, not just in our personal lives, which is incredibly important, and through our consumer choices, that's really important too, but in our workplaces and applying our expertise in the right way. So I really like what you said about communities. We can't all be experts at all of it. You talked about knowledge being more than the sum of the parts, but none of us know everything. But it's about having that role and being able to interface with others who can help you in that role. And I just think, yes, we can and will continue to exercise our democratic right. But meanwhile, we can be running environmentally friendly businesses. We can be making changes in our own lives. We can be innovating in the spheres in which we work to make the world a better place. So there's so much we can be getting on with. And I see that happening all the time, Chris. While our politicians, they have really difficult choices to make, don't they? But we can make simpler and more straightforward choices in our own lives and our own spheres.
No, I think you're exactly right. And when you're standing in a supermarket aisle, unless you're a child, and as I stood with my mother reluctantly in supermarkets, and she told me what I could and couldn't eat, we can exercise a choice. And in fact, that's a good example of us exercising the choice which can have a profound effect on the world. Now, it's quite difficult in our modern supermarkets here in the UK because the food labelling is so poor that it's very difficult to determine, where the food has come from and what its environmental cost is. And we're interested, obviously, in the economic cost of food because that's where our wages go. But we should also be interested in the environmental cost. And whilst you can see the price in pounds and pence, you often the environmental cost is hidden from us due to poor food labelling. But look, frankly, if you look at a product and you pick it up and it's grapes that are grown in Argentina, processed in Thailand, but for sale in Lincoln, you know that that's going to come at a terrible environmental cost. They're probably in plastic because they would have needed to have been transported, and the food miles are going to be colossal. So you could put that down and try and find an alternative which was produced with lower environmental cost, much closer to home. So those are the sorts of simple choices that we can all make, and at the same time send very clear messages to those people who are supplying our food that we are conscious of those sorts of things. And again, it might bring us into a discussion where we think about how much meat we eat. It's beyond ambiguity that we're eating, as a species on planet Earth, too much meat, and we need to eat less of it. And as a consequence of that, we need to go through a period of transition where we support the farmers who are currently producing meat to produce it firstly in a different way, so in a way where food standards are much higher, husbandry standards are much higher. That means basically perhaps gravitating towards organic, locally produced meats and trying to actively source those. They'll be more expensive at this point in time. But then if you're eating less of it, what you could maybe think is that if I eat meat 7 days a week and I switch it to 5, I can afford to spend a little bit more on less meat. And that would be a great advantage to our farmers and also to the animals which you're consuming. And ultimately, you may already be vegetarian. You may think that, okay, I'll make the next step and move vegan. For me, it is about transition. It's not about asking people to make bold and dramatic steps overnight. That could be disadvantageous, in fact. And I think it's unrealistic because we all change our minds and practices at a different rate. So again, I think we need to work together collectively, with our food providers, perhaps the supermarkets, and our food producers, clearly the farmers, to go through that transition whereby we have a far more healthy food footprint all across the world. And it is across the world. Because, yeah, I mean, you're in a supermarket. I mean, you're picking up foods which they're not all grown around the corner, are they, anymore? They do come from every part of the planet. So our impact, you've got to be very unselfish about this and think that the impact that you have as a consumer in Lincoln, it could be having a subsequent impact on a rainforest in Indonesia if you're buying something that's full of palm oil. So that connectivity is not just about your neighbourhood, it's about all of us now, the entire planet.
It absolutely is, and we've got some comments coming in about that. Lincolnshire strawberries always taste better anyway, says Katrina, which is, thank you, Katrina. And Tracy says, we're very lucky to live in an agricultural county, but she doesn't know where the majority of our supermarket vegetable have come from. Although actually, often you can look and try to look for those things that come from Lincolnshire. I do want to just say something about food and Lincolnshire. Lincolnshire is one of the strongest agricultural counties in the UK, and we're very proud at the university here to be working with farmers and food producers across the county. Not just in that sort of consumer way about how we choose what to eat, but to helping them innovate and farm more efficiently, farm in ways that store more carbon in the soil, to produce food, manufacturing in more efficient ways, to cut down that carbon footprint right across the food chain. So there are so many jobs out there. If anyone here is thinking about what to do, that is an interesting job with lots of innovation and opportunities to make a difference, you could do a lot worse than work in the food sector in Lincolnshire. Everybody wants to know how to reduce their carbon footprint and still to produce great nutritious food. So there's lots we can be doing there.
I think one other thing, Libby, we ought to add, because I'm frequently accused of being too hard on farmers. I think that's frequently misquoted on that account. I'm a keen supporter of our farming fraternity,
Absolutely.
as I said. But one thing that we need to recognise is that whilst we're talking about farmers and the food providers in the form of supermarkets, we also have to have a close look at ourselves once we purchase that food. We waste a third of the food that we buy as consumers in the UK. That's a colossal amount of food. Now, firstly, think about the pound in your pocket or your purse. You're wasting a third of the money that you spend on food, essentially. And the second thing is that all of that food comes with some environmental cost. There is no doubt about that. And as a consequence of that, in very simple terms, you could say, well, if we didn't waste that third of our food, we could give over a third of the space, solely for wildlife. That's way too simplistic to be realistic. But quite clearly, we as consumers need to change our practices as much as we might be asking our farmers and food dispensers to change theirs as well. We have to cut down on our food wastage. There's no question of that.
And there is waste all along that chain, from farm to table and bin and beyond. Absolutely, and we have to be less fussy consumers in that respect and only buy what we intend to eat. Absolutely. There's another comment here that I haven't read out yet from Caroline Anflett, who says it's good to see you back in Lincoln. And she's very interested in population, the uncomfortable message. And I do remember that, Chris, in one of your first visits. We talked a lot about population. We're still facing, we're still in a situation where the global population is growing and going to reach 10 billion, I think, is still the estimate of where we'll end up. And all of those people will want to to eat and live well, just as we do. So it's a real challenge. But actually tackling food waste and looking at more efficient ways of growing food is part of that challenge. But Caroline wanted to know a bit more about where we were with that.
Yeah, I think that we have to be very careful when we're talking about population. The world population is continuing to grow. It's actually now declining in some parts of the world as well. But it's intrinsically linked to consumption. It's not just about the number of people. It's about what they're consuming. And we know, for instance, that here in the UK, we consume on average per person enough to need effectively many more planets worth of resources than we have, and even more so in the United States. So it's clear that if the population of the UK is, so we speak on the UK, is smaller than that in some other parts of the world where it's rapidly growing, we're still using much more. And I think that brings us into a conversation about stuff. And it's this idea now that we need to acquire stuff. And I'm no fan of what I call the upgrade culture. So a classic example is actually our mobile phones. So, on average, we change our mobile phone every 18 months in the UK because the latest model offers a better camera or better battery life or some service to us. And this mobile phone here, I think it cost, when I bought it, about £650. It's an expensive item. I run my life on my mobile phone like so many other people. It's become an essential tool for me. But it's old. This one is at least 5 or 6 years old. I do everything I can to hang on to it because I can tell you how much it costs economically, but the environmental cost of stuff like our phones is colossal. And so I constantly try to audit my life. I look at what I have and I ask myself strictly, what do I need? So my New Year's resolution for 2020 was not to buy any clothes at all. And I sort of thought, I opened the cupboard, I thought, I've got enough shirts, got enough jumpers, got enough raincoats, how many raincoats do you need? You wear one at a time. And I decided not to buy any more. And I went through the whole of that year and this year to date, and I've been given a few T-shirts to promote campaigns and things like that. I can't deny that's the case. I haven't bought any clothes, and do you know what? I'm still warm and dry. I might be slightly out of fashion, as you can see, but we've got to think about our consumption. It's all very well talking about reducing the number of people. It's no good if the people that we've got just use more and more of the world's resources. And one of the things I do think about is, does acquiring stuff make me happy? If I were to upgrade this to the latest device, would that actually make me happy? Pound for pound, what's that going to do to the quality of my life? Well, the answer is that my mobile phone provides me with an interface with the world, which is quite useful, social media, etc. And I've mentioned, obviously, that basically it's a portable office, so that's essential. I can't tell you that actually having this device very often sends a jolt of pure euphoria through my body. And yet, if I take my dogs for a walk in the morning and I take them to a place where they're allowed off the lead, and I slip them off the lead and they just run for the sheer joy of running, then it brings me enormous joy. And that's just my dogs. So, bigger TVs, new cars, more clothes, consume. I think sometimes we just need to sit back and say, okay, but what's it actually doing for us mentally, physically? And then think about the environmental impact of that. So I'm not saying we all go back to living in caves in one t-shirt and a pair of shorts. I'm not being impractical about it, but I'm thinking that this is a point where we mustn't get sucked into a cycle of unnecessary consumerism. And I think upgrading your phone forgive me, the phone companies won't like this, but I think upgrading your phone every 18 months is a little bit unnecessary. As I say, 6 years, still going strong, still sending people pictures, still communicating. Don't really need a new one yet.
There's a lovely comment on that from Sally. She says, "Hi Chris, I have older relatives and they've recycled all their lives, don't have mobiles, grown their own veg and seem so much more relaxed for doing so." And yes, absolutely. I do think, I hope we have kind of reached peak stuff. We don't need any more stuff, but we need better stuff, I guess, and the right stuff. So yes, there's certainly a trend, I think, for buying less but buying better, as you were saying, for example, with meat. And here's another comment from Grace, who was on our mini-biz hunt this morning. So hi again, Grace. Lovely that you've come along to this as well. Yes, it is. Lincoln campus is a prime example of how even small areas surrounded by city can greatly help biodiversity. And she's asking you, Chris, whether you have any top tips for persuading people to let their gardens grow wild. And this again is partly, I think, Grace, about how we influence others. It's about being empowered ourselves, but also passing on our knowledge and getting others to come with us on this journey, isn't it? But anyway, over to you, Chris.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think what we've seen this year, if you look on social media, you'll see a lot of people who, following the lockdowns when mowing, certainly public mowing, was cut right back. And we saw our verges ablaze with wildflowers. People have become incensed this year when, councils and highways have gone back to, mowing areas which are not necessarily mown for public safety reasons. And they've been very outspoken about this. Now, again, just going back to our initial point, there's no point in just moaning about it on social media. If you have a verge that's been cut by a council or highways near you, and you consider that there are issues there where it's not necessarily for public safety, it's simply for tidiness, then don't moan about it on social media. Grow a community on social media, but do something creative with that. Come together as a group, go to whoever's mowing it and explain to them why it would be better to change the mowing regime, perhaps just cut once at the end of the summer, and only cut areas around road junctions and roundabouts and so on and so forth where we need vision. And I think that people will find, that they will be responsive to that, because equally on social media, I see lots of stories where people have done that, communities have done that, and the councils in the main have responded very positively. In fact, some of them have actually gone out and planted the verges with wildflowers rather than just let the grass go a bit ragged. So again, that's an empowering thing. So I think if you do get angry about stuff, you've got to turn that anger into something creative and positive, not just moan about it on social media. That's not going to solve the problem. Action is required to solve the problem and get a result. Of course, in your own garden, Grace, the key thing is that you can pretty much do what you like in your own garden. And so if you want to grow it long and let it go a bit ragged, you can. The trick then is to say to your neighbours who may still have manicured gardens, come and have a look at mine and show them some of the riches. And if you were on our mini beast hunt this morning, you would have seen some of those riches. Get them down on their hands and knees and show them how much more productive a patch of overgrown, natural, tangled garden can be. And so therefore it really comes down to a sort of an educational engagement exercise. You need to get them interested and then explain to them why it's a good thing. And again, on social media, there are a couple of examples I've been following this last couple of weeks where some neighbours have been shown quite a degree of animosity towards those who've allowed their gardens to go a bit more wild. And I think that, again, you've got to win the hearts and minds of people. Sometimes, on occasions, we've got to fight them, but in the main, we want to bring them on board. And the best way of doing that is not becoming divisive, but actually inviting them round for a cup of tea and then just saying, oh, look at that, and telling them something interesting and explaining to them why that's a good thing and why they might like one too. And it could be a hedgehog, it could be a butterfly, it could be a bug. So getting people in touch with it, as we have been this morning with our the things that we've been doing here, is a great way to stimulate that interest. And of course, leading by example, as we know, is a good way to achieve those sorts of successes. So yeah, literally break the ground, let the wildflowers grow through it, and then communicate your passion to your neighbours, and hopefully some of them will do the same.
Absolutely. And we won't win over all of the people all of the time. But, as I go around the country and the countryside, I'm seeing more and more patches of wild lawn than I ever saw before. So I think we are getting there. It just won't be instant. We've got another question about solar farms from Jordan, saying, how effective do you think solar farms are in combating climate change? I would just say, we need a mix of new energy sources, and solar will be part of that. And one of the things we're working on at Lincoln is new ways of storing energy, batteries, that sort of thing. There'll be lots of technology won't fix climate change alone, but it has to be part of the solution. And so they will be part of the mix. Let's just see. Oh, another question. Can we get a Spring Watch series here in Lincolnshire? That would be exciting, Chris. We have lots of fabulous wildlife in Lincolnshire. Lincolnshire Naturalists Trust Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust are just fabulous, and we do have some great sites.
Yeah, can't argue with that. We are just down the road in Norfolk for our next Autumn Watch and Winter Watch too, not too far away. And I can't argue with the fact that Lincolnshire is a great place for wildlife. You've got the seals on the coast, which are famous, of course. I think you've got highest density of breeding barn owls anywhere in the UK as well. So there are plenty of attributes here. We do try to move around the UK with our Watches series, so we can represent all of the regions in terms of their flora and fauna and their people too. So I don't know. I'll state the case. I mean, I think that again, whilst we base ourselves in one place, we are then immediately conscious of needing to get reports from everywhere else. Just one thing, Libby, it was quite telling. Whilst you were talking and answering that question about solar energy, I'm looking out the window here on the campus at a roof with solar panels on it, and I'm looking at it with quite a degree of envy, actually, because I'm determined to embrace solar power in a domestic situation. I'm quite keen to explore that at home. So I've switched to an electric vehicle, and although I get my energy from a green energy supplier at the moment, I'm still, as I say, doing a constant audit of my life. What can I as an individual do? Eat less meat, eat no meat. I've gone vegan. I'm not suggesting you need to go that far. I'm just saying that's not setting myself as a paragon of success here, because I'm not. I'm still constantly criticised by my partner Charlotte for doing things which are not environmentally friendly. But I think that I welcome that criticism. I like to be able to look at myself and think, how could I improve? And I don't mind other people telling and wagging their finger and pointing and saying, what do you think about doing this? I think that's something that we can politely and reasonably do to one another. But yeah, if I could get solar on my roof and then a battery to store the energy so that it could charge my car, I'd feel pretty good about that. Because that would be a cycle of renewables. Not that electric cars are going to save the world. There are still problems with them, but you're right to mention battery technology, which is something that we definitely need to invest in when it comes to utilising these renewable energies. We need to be able to store it once we've got it.
You've got an invitation to visit Caister in Lincolnshire, where we are all into wild gardens, hedgehogs, and growing our own produce. So there we go. That sounds great, Sally. I have been to Caister, and it is a lovely, lovely, lovely market town. And there was another question here. Oh yes, I was going to pick this one up. Speaking of action, how important, this is from Claire, how important do you feel Extinction Rebellion are in trying to combat our climate change issues?
Well, I think movements like Extinction Rebellion have been really important because they've brought a focus to these issues and they've got them in the news, and therefore you and I have been talking about them and thinking about them. So I think activist groups like that, so long again as they act within the law and they're peaceful, which was the principal aim of Extinction Rebellion. You've got to remember they are a decentralised movement. There's no boss, there's no chain of command. So many of us, would have supported, say, 80 to 90% of the things they did, but disagreed with, say, 10 or 15% of the things they did. But they is me and you. And frankly, anyone was welcome to pick up the badge and take some action. So I'm not saying that I would support 100% of everything that Extinction Rebellion did, but I think that collectively they did a very important job in 2019. They certainly, through their non-violent direct actions, brought the climate, into the news over a prolonged period, and that they were at the vanguard at that point. I think that movements like that need to continue to evolve. I think that, frankly, you can't just keep performing the same non-violent direct action. It would actually get boring. It wouldn't get media attention. Therefore, it wouldn't get people talking and thinking about it. I think they need to be very creative. And I think that often they need to be constructive in the sense that it's all very well ringing the bell and saying there's a crisis, but it's a lot more comforting to people if you ring the bell and say there's a crisis, but here's the ambulance, as it were. And I think, therefore, moving forward, when we take those sorts of campaigns, we want to be offering solutions alongside the bad news, if you know what I mean. And therefore, we need to be a bit more imaginative how we run some of those campaigns. They need to change. I mean, the world is changing, and therefore the way that we campaign needs to change. And I think, therefore, we need to constantly keep our fingers on the pulse of the media, the public mood. I mean, Megan, my stepdaughter, and I were about to launch Wildlife Rebellion as a subdivision of Extinction Rebellion, and we were going to do that in March of last year. We had 5 campaigns, we've got funding, we've formed good potential project partnerships with some quite unusual, high-profile people. We were keen to integrate environmental awareness with sport and music and art, things that Extinction Rebellion hadn't been focusing on. And we were very keen, as I said, to be offering solutions, not just highlighting the potential dangers. But when COVID struck and we went into lockdown, it was very clear to us that some of the campaigns, some of the messages and pressures that they were designed to generate were not going to be in any way appropriate. So we didn't do it. We are now in the process of rethinking which one of those campaigns might be applicable, which ones can we reshape for a new world, a post-COVID, well, not post-COVID yet, aren't we? But we've changed the way that we're living subsequent to the outbreak of this pandemic. And therefore, I think all of we campaigners, in order to make sure that we get the right message across in the right way, with the right amount of efficiency, need to think very carefully about who we're delivering that message to, what they're going to do with it, and how it can be useful to them. So I hope that Extinction Rebellion, we talk obviously with them and some of the key players all the time, and I think there's a broad consensus that we need to change our methods, basically, and that's what we'll be doing. And in the run-up to the COP at the end of this year, a very significant conference that will be taking place in Glasgow in November, we can expect to see more demonstrations and more public action, but I, for one, will be hoping that it will be clever, maybe even humorous, creative, and imaginative, and not just some of the same old, same old?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, Extinction Rebellion and the student strikes led by Greta Thunberg, they just changed the debate. It was so heartening. They really did shift the debate. But as Chris says, every organisation has to move with the times, and that debate is now happening. We are in the run-up to COP26, the Conference of Parties, a hugely important conference for the planet, for all of us. So I'm sure there'll be lots of activity leading up to that. We're planning here at Lincoln to run a festival during that first week of the COP26, where all of our students can get involved and express their feelings and thoughts and make their own pledges about tackling climate change. So that's something I'm really looking forward to at the start of next academic year. We'll get going on that. Yeah, let's just have another look. It's great to see so many of your comments coming in. Jordan's coming to your masterclass later and would like to be able to chat with you. So perhaps that's something, if you have time, Chris, that would be great.
Yep.
Let's see. Martha was at the Oxford Circus protest, where they were very keen to maintain peaceful protest. Absolutely, Martha, it's so important, isn't it, to retain that moral high ground if you are protesting, not to get violent. That never wins people's thoughts. And Olivia asks whether you know of any companies that are working to prevent climate change. I'll let you answer in a minute, Chris, but so many of the companies we work with at the University of Lincoln are really keen to cut down their carbon footprint. Not necessarily the same as preventing climate change, but absolutely lots and lots of companies are desperate to cut down their carbon footprint because they know it's the right thing to do, and they know that their consumers want it. But I'll let you answer the question, Chris, if you've got any good examples.
Yeah, no, I think increasingly that we see this. Yeah, you're right. I think in the past we were always sceptical of what we call greenwashing, where companies would make a small initiative or a very small investment for hopefully, from their point of view, a high return in terms of their green credentials. We were quite often cynical and sceptical about their real purpose. I think, though, that now greenwashing is much harder because in order for that forever to have worked, they would have need to have greenwashed and brainwashed their employees. Well, that's no longer, possible. I think, certainly within the UK and Europe, most employees of any company will be well aware of the issues. And so it's very difficult to pull the wool over their eyes. So increasingly now we see very meaningful changes in business. And we know that climate change, is costing us economically trillions and trillions of dollars a year. Someone's got to clear up mess all of the time, pay for the damage, the insurance claims, the medical emergencies, the public services that are disrupted or called upon. So it comes with an economic cost as well as a human, social and environmental cost. And I think that therefore it is factored into business now. And it's really interesting to hear people like the Bank of England, certainly under Mark Carney before he left, speaking repeatedly and very candidly to businesses, telling them that they need to be a part of the solution. And they need to, again, audit their business and see what they can do across the board. So I get a lot of businesses, coming to me, sometimes asking for support or advice. I'm always diligent to check through their credentials, but increasingly when I do that, I find a lot of good things. There's no question about that. And of course, it makes sense, going forward into the future. It's always better to jump before you're pushed. If you wait, if you're running a bad business and you hang on to the last minute to implement those changes, by the time you implement them, someone else has outthought you. I mean, let's take the vegan sausage roll from Greggs, for instance. I mean, you remember the hoo-ha that caused. It was Piers Morgan couldn't stop talking about it, which meant that everyone knew about it. And, every time I went to try one as a vegan, for the first 3 months, I could never get one. They'd sold out. So from an economic point of view, introducing a vegan sausage roll, which isn't groundbreaking thinking or innovation, must have paid enormous dividends for Greggs. So those sorts of, changing with the times, providing a plant-based alternative to their normal range of produce. If you're at the head of it, there's every chance that you're going to prosper. And many businesses are thinking that. They're thinking very clearly about that. And so, again, you could say, well, it's all about profit, but I'm interested in it being about good as well. So I think that sometimes we should take time to applaud those businesses who are taking a lead, often at a cost, because, if you're investing in something that may not work, you're taking a risk. So we should congratulate them, actually, for their forward thinking and do everything we can to support them.
I absolutely agree, Chris. And we need to make choices that reward them as well. We've got a couple more questions. We're coming to the end, sadly, but we've got time for a bit more of a conversation. Ifosa, you've asked about practical work in Lincoln. Absolutely, we're very, very keen on practical work for all our students in the sciences and the arts and in health areas. If you want to write to me with a little more detail about what course you're interested in, I can let you have a bit more detailed answer. But we have fabulous labs, fabulous facilities, and fabulous equipment. And then there's another question from Martha about innovative and interesting solutions for addressing climate change and wildlife conservation. So that's quite an interesting question, Chris.
Yeah, no, I think that, now is the time to be, thinking anew. I mean, if you want to be honest about it, if we just take conservation, actually, we can ask ourselves a really simple but hard and harsh question: has conservation worked with the models that we've been employing? Well, we've got to say that the answer is probably no. We've lost more than 50% of they're saying 65%, between 65 and 70% actually, of the world's wildlife since 1970. So that, I haven't been an active conservationist since 1970. I was only 9 years old, but I've been aware of conservation issues at that time. So the models and techniques that we've been employing clearly haven't worked. And if you look at the UK, many of our species have been in significant decline since the 1970s. And certainly by the mid-70s, I would have considered myself to be a young conservationist. So on my generation's watch, we failed using the techniques that we've got. Now, some of those techniques definitely work. We just didn't employ enough of them and broadly enough or rapidly enough. It's not that they didn't work. It's just we couldn't get the backing or the public or political will to get them happening. That needs to change. But I think the other thing is that we've got to accept that some of those ideas are now out of date, and we need new, young, dynamic, energetic, maybe risky ideas at this stage to make a difference. And that again brings me back to one of the key purposes of our discussion today, which is to try and, I hope, stimulate young people into thinking about continuing their education, hopefully here at Lincoln or in other universities, because they're the people that are going to have the aptitude and the ability, the ambition to implement these solutions. They're the people who are out here somewhere in this campus, at the moment, honing their skills so that they can be on the front line of solving some of these issues. And we've messed up, and our job now is to try and stop continuing to mess up and try and soften the blow for all of these young people who will have to come into a world where they have the ability to solve problems, but we need to empower them and trust them to do so. So again, that's we've been out this morning talking to young people here and exploring the rich biodiversity on site. The results, if they've done their A-levels, come out on August the 10th, and the university will be open in the days following that, as clearing, as you know, clearing will start then. And we're keen to recruit as many young people into natural sciences and sciences as possible. And you've mentioned lots of technologies which aren't directly natural sciences. We talked about farming, improving efficiency. That could be robotics. It could be, such a wealth of things which are only indirectly related to the environment. So the skill set of people that we need to get things straight is actually very broad. But we'll only be able to do that if we've got trained and qualified young people. And I see this as a great opportunity. And as I said in an interview this morning, when I left university in 1980, with my undergraduate degree, it was relatively difficult for undergraduates to get a job in biology, if you like, zoology. I think that's going to be very different in the very near future, because environmental recovery is going to be at the forefront of the entire world's business, and that should offer enormous opportunities for young people. So at this point in time, if you wanted to make an investment in your life in education, this was probably, I'm bound to say this, aren't I? Because I'm a zoologist who cares about the health of the world. But if you were to move into natural sciences or something which, as I said, supported environmental, dealing with the environmental crisis, then I think that you'd be in good stead for a healthy career.
There will absolutely be jobs where you can make a difference, whether you're qualified in engineering, computer science, chemistry, life sciences, as Chris said. All these areas are going to be absolutely essential to solving the problems we're facing at the moment. So, please do think about, if you're not already enrolled on one of our degree programs, think about what we've got to offer here at Lincoln, and right now we're focusing on clearing, which will start next week. I think we've got to give out the results of our photography competition just at the end, but there's one more really interesting question if we've got time, just to mention that regenerative agriculture, that's really interesting. Will it become the norm? I suspect I know that some farmers are doing regenerative agriculture, and so for them it's becoming the norm. Others are partway there. They might have part of their farm in regenerative agriculture, and we need all sorts of scientists and advisors supporting farmers to support the soil to store carbon at the same time as growing productive crops. It's a really exciting challenge. That I think will become more and more common as we go forwards. I don't know what you think, Chris.
Yeah, no, again, it's about testing it. And, the thing about farming, and it's clear talking to farmers, is that many of them have been on the land, if you like, all of their lives. Maybe some of those farms have been in their family. I know we have a lot more large farms now than we've had, in recent decades. But nevertheless, they know that space. And I think that the one size fits all, it doesn't fit for farmers. So coming up with sort of central policies, which you tell everyone to do, it doesn't work. It generates animosity and frustration. I think we need to empower them, actually, and leave a lot more of the decisions to their choice, because they will understand what works for them in that place. I think that I've seen brilliant examples of regenerative farming where it's really working. I think it's something that we should encourage to grow with the support that you suggest, basically through quantification and qualification, and something that we actively encourage. It's clear that we need to change our farm landscape. It's not one which is going to continue to, it's probably not functioning in many parts now, and certainly won't be in the future. But that, again, is something which requires active transition and total support of everyone across our communities, including our scientists and the technologies that you mentioned too. We've all got to eat. We need to eat more effectively, efficiently, in a more environmentally friendly way. So working with those farmers to encourage them to try new ideas, see if they fit, if they don't, try others, is part and parcel of what we need to do. But we do need to do it now, not keep putting it off. I think the key thing that we have to end our discussion with is that if we were having this conversation 30 years ago, there may have been some small degree of flexibility in when we get going. Unfortunately, we've pontificated for too long, and we haven't taken radical or rapid enough action, and we now find ourselves in a very critical position where our scientists are telling us that it's today that we need to start taking this action. And that's why, again, just to highlight what you said, Libby, the COP, Conference of Parties in November, will be, I think, of global importance. And therefore, we need to get our messages really clear and straight to our globally elected decision makers who will be attending that conference, so that they will represent our very urgent needs and make the right decisions. If they don't make the right decisions there, and if we don't make the right decisions in our own life at this point, then I think we're making things very, very difficult for ourselves in the future.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, on that note, let's be positive about what will come out of that conference, and positive about the differences we can all make in our lives, and the influence we can have on those around us. But let's move on to talk about the results of our photography competition, Chris.
Yep. So we had two categories, one for wild animals and one for sort of pets, as it were. And so we've picked one winner from both. The first is this one. I don't know if we can put this one up. And this is they're both together. Okay, so on the left-hand side of my screen, we've got this lovely portrait of someone's cat. Actually, there's a name on it now. Let's have a look, because they were judged blind, so there could be no bias. Okay, so James Wilson has taken this photograph. We like this one because the cat's in repose, as they often are, and it's relaxed. It shows a comfort in that environment, and with the photographer too. The lighting's really nice. It's soft. It's slightly backlit, and for me the highlight was the whiskers, those lovely, brilliant bristles which emanate from the cat's face and head, which it uses to navigate its environment, and incredibly sensitive organs. They're highly innervated at the base, and they can whisk with them. And when the reason they've got them on that front of that part of their face is that when they're in the very, very final milliseconds of grabbing their prey, they've twisted those whiskers forward, and they are following any last microsecond movements of that prey before they grab it. So they are an essential tool of a small predator's trade, as it were. And there they look so beautiful, those whiskers. And so lovely portrait of a cat by James Wilson. The gannet picture, the sky-pointing gannet, Chloe Fudge's image, is again all about the lighting. And for me, photography is all about light. It's sky-pointing because it's part of a repertoire of displays that they do. Very often with gannets, the pair are together on the nest, and one of them will sky-point. And what it's saying to the other one, effectively, is I'm leaving, I'm going. If they have dependent young, they can't both jump off the cliff at the same time and disappear to Denmark to get food, because the young would probably perish. So they have to determine between themselves who's going to go and who's going to stay. And they do this by pointing to the sky. So if this one is pointing and it's the male or female, then the other sex will think, oh, right, okay, he or she's about to go. I'll stick with the youngster. So it's something that we see quite commonly. But here, Chloe has caught it in beautiful light. And the dark background, taken at Bempton, it was her first trip to Bempton, actually, to see these superb birds. She's got the dark background, it's beautifully lit, and it's a lovely shape. And if you look at the patterning on the gannet, that lovely coffee wash on the back of the head, the blue eye, all of those delicate lines of mascara drawn around the extraordinary beak. They are beautiful birds, and that's a lovely portrait. So worthy winners both, I would say.
Absolutely gorgeous pictures. I hadn't seen them before. They're really beautiful pictures. So thank you, and to the others who sent in photos as well. That's fabulous. I think we've run out of time, Chris. So thank you so much for doing this live lounge for us. And thank you to all of our audience. We've had some really fabulous questions. I know some of the people in the audience now are going to be at the Media Masterclass later. They're telling us that, so that's fabulous. We'll see them later. We've had some really stimulating questions. One question we haven't answered is what you can feed hedgehogs. And I learned earlier today dry cat food. So I've answered that one now. That's, I didn't know before this morning. Thank you, Sally, for being here. I've certainly enjoyed this conversation with Chris. And as I say, it's been great to have the audience along. So thank you ever so much, Chris.
It's a pleasure. Libby, can I just end with a parting thought? And that is that we've talked about the need for us all to be part of the solution. We've been, I think, pragmatic and realistic about the fact that a solution is possible, and that we need more young people to be involved in that solution and to be, valued participants. They need to know what they're talking about, so therefore they should go to university. there's one other thing, and that is that, and we've mentioned it, that we need to get on with it. So I asked everyone on Radio 4 on Monday to set their alarm clocks 15 minutes earlier than they typically would, so that they would have an extra 15 minutes in their day to do something to help address this environmental crisis. And that could be simply waking up and getting on social media and learning a bit more about some aspect of that. It could be communicating again on social media with a like-minded community of people and sharing ideas. Or it could mean getting up and putting your slippers on and going feeding the birds, or anything. But, you know, if we all gave 15 minutes free a year, it would give us 10 times the amount of total working hours that are put in the UK every year. All of the adults in the UK, if we did that. Now, when I tell you that, I don't think it's beyond dispute that we have the time, we still have the time to save the world, but we've got to get up and get on with it. So I'll reiterate my suggestion, and that is that we all set our alarm clocks 15 minutes earlier tomorrow, losing only 3% of our sleep time, which is inconsequential, and we get up and do something. We have to be part of the solution, and you have to believe me when I tell you that you can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. My alarm will be set 15 minutes early. And let's hope that all our audience do the same. That's a brilliant thought. Thank you so much.